The movie opens with a chaotic scene. Military radio chatter crackles with desperate reports of an unexpected and devastating attack. These mysterious creatures are assaulting human settlements across the globe. We're shown a glimpse of the destruction. Netherlands, Colorado, is in ruins. Remarkably, anything above 8,000 feet in altitude remains untouched. Despite the military's efforts, they are quickly overwhelmed by the unknown enemy. 3 years later, humanity has been driven to the heights. Survivors huddle together in small, isolated communities nestled in the mountains, safe from the monsters that cannot ascend above 8,000 feet. In the Colorado Rockies, one such settlement houses a group of survivors, including a young boy named Hunter. Hunter, driven by curiosity and perhaps a longing for the past, ventures below the safe altitude line. He uses binoculars to look at a neighboring community perched on a distant mountain. On his way back to safety, a glowing red light catches his attention. A monster has picked up his scent. Hunter sprints up the slope, his lungs burning, towards the clearly marked safe zone. The creature gains on him, but he crosses the line just in time. The monster stops its pursuit at the invisible boundary. Back in the safety of their settlement, Hunter recounts his terrifying experience to his father, Will. Will is furious, not just at Hunter's recklessness, but also because of Hunter's fragile health. He relies on an oxygen machine every night due to underdeveloped lungs, a consequence of premature birth. Will knows that a chase like that could have been fatal. Later, Will goes hunting with Caddy, a close friend and companion since the death of his wife, Tara. They discuss Hunter's frequent trips below the boundary. Caddy understands. Hunter misses having friends his age. He longs for companionship and a sense of normalcy, but Will knows it's more than just loneliness. The place Hunter visits is where he last saw his mother. While tracking a deer, Will and Caddy successfully bring down their prey. On their way back, they observe their neighbor, Na, tinkering with strange equipment. She's working on makeshift armor-piercing rounds, testing them on a piece of monster scale. The scales are incredibly tough, almost indestructible. Before the apocalypse, Na was a brilliant scientist. Now, she is consumed by a single goal: finding a way to kill the creatures. That evening, Will is jolted awake by the warning beep of Hunter's breathing machine. The filters are running low. Will quickly replaces them, but he knows they're dangerously close to running out. He makes a difficult decision. He must risk a trip to the lowlands, specifically to Boulder, hoping the hospital there might still have supplies. The next day, Will spends precious time with Hunter. He teaches him how to protect their potato plants from the cold and shows him the proper way to catch fish. It's Hunter's birthday, and Will manages to find the last packet of macaroni and cheese at the local store, Hunter's favorite meal. They share a special dinner, but Hunter's loneliness is palpable. He asks why they don't use the radio to communicate with other settlements. Will explains that their electricity barely powers Hunter's machine, and they communicate with flags. Later, Caddy joins Will on the porch for a couple of beers. They reminisce about their lives before the world changed, a time of carefree joy. They watch Na continuing her experiments, driven by her obsession. That night, Hunter suffers another respiratory attack. Will is forced to use an emergency syringe of medicine. They are out of machine filters and now out of the emergency medication. Will knows he's out of time. He goes to Na's house in the middle of the night. Their conversation reveals a complex relationship. Na's drinking is her way of coping with the horrors she's witnessed. Will has his own burdens. They discuss Na's previous trip to Boulder to gather supplies for her research. It was during this ill-fated expedition that Tara, Will's wife, was killed. Will harbors a deep resentment towards Na, blaming her for Tara's death. Yet, Na is the only one who has ever returned from such a dangerous trip. Desperate, Will asks her to accompany him to the hospital. Na initially refuses. She calls the idea madness, suicide. The creatures would tear them apart, but Will persists. He reminds her of Tara, of the debt she owes him. He points out that she has nothing left to lose. He leaves, confident that she will eventually agree. As Will departs, Na begins working on a special compass. She is haunted by flashbacks of her last expedition, the brutal slaughter of her friends, including Tara. The guilt is overwhelming. Ultimately, this guilt compels her to accept Will's mission. Will asks a local woman to look after Hunter for 5 days while he's gone. The next morning, he stocks up on weapons at the armory. Caddy finds him there, preparing to leave without a word. She's hurt and angry. She accuses him of repeating the same mistake he made with Tara, running off to his death. Caddy, it's clear, has feelings for Will. Determined, she grabs a gun and insists on joining him. Will tries to dissuade her, but Caddy won't be denied. She argues that he needs someone to watch his back. Na is already waiting outside. She warns Caddy that the monsters up close are far more terrifying than they appear from the mountaintop. They move with incredible speed and tear through flesh effortlessly. Bullets are largely ineffective. The only way to slow them down is a direct hit to the face. Before they leave, Will promises Hunter that he'll be back in 5 days. Hunter's response is chilling. Those were the same words his mother spoke before her fatal trip with Na. The group sets off, following a route designed to minimize their time below the safe altitude. To save time, they plan to use a ski lift to cross a dangerous section of the lowlands. Tensions rise between Na and Caddy, who clearly dislike each other. Will, frustrated by Na's attitude, knocks a flask of alcohol out of her hand. They come across a wrecked military convoy, a grim reminder of the initial attack. They decide to scavenge the abandoned vehicles and the remains of the fallen soldiers for supplies. While they search, Na explains the function of her compass. It can detect monsters within half a mile. Their magnetic field is stronger than that of any living organism. She gives the compass to Caddy, tasking her with keeping watch, while Will searches for gear, and Na retrieves a piece of armored monster scale for her research. Will finds an underbarrel grenade launcher, but admits he doesn't know how to use it. Caddy, with a confident air, attaches it to her rifle. She's from Texas, she explains. It doesn't mean her dad taught her to use a grenade launcher. As they prepare to leave, another argument erupts. Na accuses Caddy of flirting with Will, the husband of her deceased friend. Caddy retorts that Tara's death is Na's fault. The argument escalates into a physical fight before they reluctantly move on. Caddy makes it clear she doesn't like Na and never has. Na responds that she doesn't blame her. Along the way, they encounter a large herd of wild horses, a sign that nature is thriving in the absence of humans. They eventually reach an old ski resort and the ski lift they plan to use. Na's compass warns of a nearby monster. Caddy wants to retreat to higher ground, but Na argues there's no time. Will agrees with Na. He sprints to the lift control room to restore power. As the monster closes in, Caddy fires the grenade launcher. The explosion momentarily stuns the creature but doesn't harm it. While Caddy and Na take defensive positions and fire their weapons, Will manages to get the lift running. He and Na jump onto a chair and begin ascending. Caddy, now higher up, climbs a support pole and leaps for the moving lift. Will grabs her arms and pulls her up just as the monster lashes out with a tentacle, striking the cable. The jolt sends all three tumbling to the ground. Fortunately, the fall isn't too high. They scramble to their feet and sprint towards the safe altitude line, reaching it just as the monster stops, unable to follow. That night, they take shelter in a resort house. Over a bottle of whiskey, Na explains the chaos of the initial attack. Humanity was completely unprepared. They had no time to understand the creature's weaknesses. Seeing them up close is a different experience, she says. Civilization collapsed in days. She reveals a crucial piece of information. The monsters only attack humans. They ignore animals entirely. This challenges the assumption that they are predators hunting for food. They don't consume their kills. They simply exterminate humans. Adding to the mystery, they are strictly limited by altitude. They can't climb above a certain height. Before sleep, Will reflects on a conversation he had with Tara before her final trip to Boulder. He had tried to dissuade her, accusing Na of being driven by a selfish desire to immortalize her name as the first to kill a monster. He argued that Na, having no family of her own, couldn't understand the value of life and was willing to lead anyone to their death to achieve her goal. Tara, however, was determined. She believed in Na's work. The next day, the trio reaches the entrance to a mine that tunnels through the mountain. Na is furious that Will didn't warn them about this route. While the entrance and exit are above the safe zone, the middle of the tunnel dips below it, with multiple offshoots descending even deeper. She points out the danger. The monsters emerge from underground and navigate effortlessly. This route puts them at a significant disadvantage. They can see in the dark, detect the smallest amount of CO2, and her compass won't work properly within the mountain. Despite the risks, they strap on helmets with flashlights and venture into the mine. They discover the exit is locked. Forced to find an alternate way out, they descend a ladder into a lower tunnel. They know they can't sprint. It would exhaust them and increase their CO2 output, making them easier to track. In one of the corridors, they spot a faint red glow. They run, Caddy firing a grenade at the entrance, hoping to create a blockage. It barely slows the monster. They squeeze into a narrow crawl space, turn off their flashlights, and hold their breath. The monster searches, its tentacle sensors probing the air. Will ignites a flare to distract it, giving them time to crawl further. Caddy leads the way, but comes face to face with another monster. It impales her with its tentacle and drags her into the darkness. Will and Na, devastated, find another ladder and climb out of the mine. They mourn Caddy briefly before continuing to a ranger house where they plan to spend the night. At the house, Will finds a package of macaroni and cheese, Hunter's favorite. He reflects on how many times he's made it for his son. As they sit by the fire, Na shares her hypothesis. The monster scales generate an electromagnetic field. If she can design a bullet that disrupts this field, it could cause the creatures to explode. She needs chemicals from a lab to test her theory. Will dismisses the idea as crazy, expressing regret that his wife died chasing Na's magic bullet. Na insists it's science, not magic, just a hypothesis. The next morning, Will and Na drive down to the safe boundary, where the city and hospital are located. They cautiously enter the hospital, searching for medical supplies. They find the storage room, but the shelves are empty. They hear a noise and move on. Will discovers another storage area stocked with the filters he needs. He fills his backpack while Na's compass warns of a nearby monster. As they head for the exit, the creature smashes through walls. A tentacle wraps around Will. Na uses a fire axe to free him. They flee, activating the fire suppression system for cover. They find a storage room filled with oxygen tanks. Will devises a plan. Na should run while he sets up an ambush. He waits for the monster to charge and fires at an oxygen tank, triggering an explosion that blows the creature out of the building. Na, who didn't leave, insists they detour to a nearby lab instead of returning to the mountains. She argues that they can't live like this forever. They need to fight back. Will reluctantly agrees. At the lab, Na experiments, coating bullets with chemicals and testing them on monster scales. Will finds a photo of Na's family. She admits she lost them during the initial attack. She was at work, even though it was her day off. She's haunted by guilt, just as she feels about Tara. Their initial experiments fail. Will suggests they leave, but Na insists on staying. She tells Will to go back to Hunter. Na refines her process, using a blowtorch and incorporating cobalt into the bullet coating. She successfully creates and charges her first cobalt-coated bullet just as a monster attacks. She fires and the monster explodes. Meanwhile, Will's truck crashes. He wakes and is chased by monsters. Just as they close in, one of the monsters collapses and explodes. Nina arrives, having used her cobalt bullets to kill the creatures. They discover the monsters are machines. Will and Na return to the village. Hunter greets his father with a hug. Na raises a flag with a Jolly Roger symbol, signaling other settlements about her discovery. The good news spreads. At the village memorial, Na and will place a bullet inscribed with Caddy's name. They set out to fight back. A volunteer squad descends from the mountains, armed with the new weapons. The film ends with explosions in the distance, as humanity begins to fight back against the robotic invaders.